What's up everyone, what's up Magic brewers from all over the world, what's up janky deck builders, what's up Timmys. We are back for a new video and today we're going to talk about an old classic, Bluewhitecontrol. As always, here at the Casual MTG Deck channel, we're going to do something special, something that you Timmys will like. We're going to build it with a twist. And the twist will be, I will be playing with a card from Throne of Eldraine called Midnight Clock. Now you could ask yourself the very relevant question, why the hell would you build around such a bad card? Well, I'll give you 3 reasons. First of all, during the holiday season, I gambled on a collector booster and I got this. Yes, indeed, a full art Midnight Clock. So, of course, we have to build around the deck. It's a full art Midnight Clock. What else? Second reason. We are a casual deck channel, so this is my casual deck channel. So this means on this channel I can do whatever the I want, right? So if I want to build around the Midnight Clock, I will build around Midnight Clock. You don't have to watch the video, okay? We are going to build around the Midnight Clock. But there is also a third reason. Now, you might know I play Magic for a long time. And back in the day, when I really just started out, I built a deck around this card. It's another clock. It's called Armageddon's Clock. Now this deck consisted back in the day about around 67 cards. It had 20 lands, of course, because you only need 20 lands when you play like 67 cards. No, that's not good. It also played mostly 4 drops and above, so a mana curve wasn't really there back in the day. I played cards like Stormseeker. I'll show it here. I played cards like Winter Orb. What else? Icy Manipulator. But I also played, of course, the Armageddon's Clock, with the incredible combo Circle of Protection artifacts. So this was really one of the first brutes I ever made, and when I saw the Midnight Clock I started to think about the old deck I made, and I said, like, why don't I go a little bit back into the archives and try to combine both. So I'll combine the Midnight Clock and the Armageddon's Clock in one deck. So before we start with the land base, I also wanna thank you for watching my channel. Give the video a thumbs up if you like my content, and if you really love my content, then please subscribe. I also be handing out some vouchers from our sponsor Card Market very soon. So if you stick around, you also might win a voucher that can maybe buy you the whole deck, why not? The land base is pretty straightforward. I play 7 islands, 6 plains, and I also play some dual lands. Now you know this is a casual budget deck tech channel, so I don't go with the expensive tundras or the expensive hollowed fountains or fetch lands. No, I just play some reasonably costed cards like Prairie Stream, which is a dual land that I like a lot, and also I play 1 Nimbus Maze. It's also a very cool card. It comes into play untapped. It has cool art, and it's also a dual land pretty often in the deck. Then I also play a card called Karn's Bastion from War of the Spark. It has Proliferate, and I will talk a bit later why this card is very important, and therefore I play 2 of them. Some other lands are Mage-Ring Network. It's a land where you can store in counters that will give you a lot of mana because you can take them out all at once later in the game. And there's also a flexible slot for Mirrodin's core. Other cards with counters on them, because yes, I'm going to play a counter team with the clocks, are Vivid Creek and Vivid Meadow. And last but not least, I play one Mystic Sanctuary. I play a bunch of islands, so there's a relatively good chance that this could help me get an instant or sorcery back on top of my library when I play this card. Alright, now let's head into the clocks, and first we're going to talk about Armageddon's Clock. Armageddon's Clock is a pretty old card from the Antiquity series, and I picked up 2 copies for around $1 on Magic Card Market. I like the black bordered ones, so that's why I opted for that one. It also says continuous artifact. So of course it's just an artifact, but back in the day it was called continuous artifact. What does the card do? Well, at the beginning of your upkeep you just put a counter on it, and then afterwards it deals damage to each player equal to the number of counters on it. Of course, with the proliferate mechanic, you will be able to put multiple counters on it or put more than one counter on it every turn. Now, every player can spend 4 mana during any upkeep to remove a counter. So therefore, we need to really invest putting a lot of counters on the clock. So it deals a lot of damage, and it also pushes my opponent to invest a lot of mana in it when he or she wants to remove counters from the clock, and therefore the opponent won't be able to do anything else. So what about us? We are going to defend ourselves from the clock with 2 cards. One of them is the old Circle of Protection artifacts. So we just play 2 mana at the activation of the clock, and then we will prevent all the damage the clock will deal. And then there's also the Wanderer, also a Planeswalker from War of the Spark, and that will prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you and other permanents you control. And because the clock doesn't deal combat damage, because it's not a creature that attacks, you will have the Wanderer to protect you from the clock. So we had 2 Armageddon's clocks. Of course, we also need to play 2 Midnight clocks. The Midnight clock also gives us blue mana, and for 3 mana you can put an hour counter on the Midnight clock. Remember, it says 3 mana, you don't need to tap it, so you can also use the Midnight clock to tap it for 1 mana, add 2 other mana, and then you can also put 1 counter on the clock when it's tapped. That's not a problem. At the beginning of each upkeep, you also put an hour counter on the clock. So when the clock has struck 12 and Marty McFly saves his own future, we also get a Time Twister for free. But just for us, not for our opponent. So what we'll do is we'll shuffle our hand and our graveyard back into our library, and we'll just draw 7 new cards. Of course, then we'll exile the clock, but it did its work, and there's also another one in the deck. Now, I said it before, we are going to play with a proliferate team. So let's have a look. Proliferate, what the hell is this weird keyword I'm talking about? So proliferate is a keyword action introduced in Scars of Mirrodin, and when a player proliferates, he or she chooses any number of players and or permanents that have counters on them. Then he or she puts another of those counters on these players or permanents. So this means that all the permanents we have, when we proliferate and the permanent already has 1 counter on it, we'll put an additional counter on it. So we can put more counters on our lands, we can put more counters on our midnight clocks, we can put more counters on our Armageddon's clock. We are going to put a lot of counters, so make sure you have a big bag of dice with you when you want to try out this deck. Apart from the midnight clock and the Armageddon's clock, we're also going to play some other artifacts. In a control deck, it's important to have a lot of mana. So we're going to play one Pentet Prism. It's an artifact with Sunburst, and when it comes into play, you can put X amount of charge counters on it. And when it comes into play, you can put X amount of charge counters on it for each color of mana you use to cast it. That will usually be 2. You can remove a counter from it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Now this is cool because you'll mostly play it with 2 counters on it, and then it will get a lot of more counters which you can take off whenever you need a lot of mana. I also play 2 copies of Astral Cornucopia. It will cost 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. It can also cost 18 mana, but we'll usually play it in the beginning for 3 mana. Then you can tap it for 1 mana of any color. But because we're going to play a proliferate team, this artifact will become stronger and it will give 2 mana, 3 mana, 4 mana. I even had games where I could tap it for 10 mana. A similar card, but for colorless mana, is the Ever-Flowing Chalice. It has multi-kicker too, so you will always be playing it for 2 or more. And of course, you can also add charge counters on it with the Proliferate team. It's important in a control deck to get a lot of mana. These were already some mana artifacts and of course our clocks, but we're also going to talk about some creatures. I play 2 Thrumming Birds and 2 Grateful Apparitions. They're actually the same card, just the color is different. And when it deals combat damage, you proliferate. So that means you'll put a lot of counters on your permanents that already have counters on it. Besides the 4 birds that proliferate, I also play 2 Flux Channelers. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. So we are playing a lot of non-creature spells. So this is also an early blocker and a good creature that could help us put more counters on our cards. Another card that works great with counters is the Triskelion. Now you could also say, well, Walking Ballista is also a good card, but we are mostly a budget channel, and at the recording of this video this card was about $25 or about 20 euros. So we're going to stick with this cheap creature, the Triskelion. It enters the battlefield with 3 counters on it, and you could remove counters to deal damage to any target. Here it says creature or player, but actually it is errata to any target. So the Triskelion is also a great card to put in this proliferate blue-white control deck. I also play 1 Arcanist Owl. It's a flexible card. It only costs 4 hybrid mana, so that could be white or blue. And when it enters the battlefield, I could look at the top 4 cards of my library, reveal an artifact or enchantment from amongst them and put it in my hand. So actually it's a 3/3 flyer that will mostly draw me a card. And I have a little bit of selection with it as well. I play 25% of artifacts and enchantments in my deck, so will hit most of the time. A good control deck, of course, needs some card draw. And that's why we are going to play the following cards. I play 2 Contentious Plants. It's a card for 2 mana, a sorcery that says proliferate, so putting counters on my permanents, and this is something we like. And we also draw 1 card. Tezzeret's Gambit is a similar card. It has a Phyrexian mana. That means you could either play blue or you can pay 2 life for it. And it draws 2 cards and then you proliferate. Then I also play 1 Finale of Revelation because I want to draw a bunch of cards. And the card also has the text, if X is 10 or more, so that will be you drawing 10 cards, shuffle your graveyard into your library, draw X cards, untap up to 5 lands, and you'll have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So you would think, well, Bram, you need 12 mana to do this. This will never happen. And then I will tell you this will happen because you'll have artifacts that will easily give you 5, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10 mana. So try it out. It's a really good card in this deck. Another card that's always a really good card in a Bluewhitecontrol deck is Sphinx's Revelation. Now, because the introduction of Pioneer, the card went up a bit, but don't worry if it's too expensive. I'll go in the maybe board later in this video and give you some cheaper alternatives. But I also would advise you to really consider investing in this card because it's a really good card for EDH as well. And yeah, it's just a strong card that you can have in your collection. So if you like playing Bluewhitecontrol, invest in at least 1 Sphinx's Revelation because it will draw you cards and give you life, which will be very important in this deck, especially against the aggro decks, because you don't have that much life gain and the deck will take up some time to set up. So Sphinx's Revelation, good investment. So a Bluewhitecontrol deck needs some removal against creatures. So let's have a look which removal cards we are going to play. We'll start with Contagion Clasp. It's a 2 mana artifact that puts a -1/-1 counter on a target creature. So you could say, well, that's not that strong, but it could also proliferate for 4 mana. And when you proliferate, you can add another counter on it. So that could be also another -1 counter on a target creature. So I decided to try out 1 Contagion Clasp in the deck to see what it does. So far it's doing okay, so maybe let's think about some other additions in the deck. I just like to include it because it also proliferates. For the mass removal spells, I included 1 Time Wipe, 1 Day of Judgment and 1 Supreme Verdict. Now the last one is also a bit similar than the Sphinx's Revelation. It has gone up in price a bit, so if you don't want to invest $10 or $15 or euros into a Supreme Verdict, don't worry, there are a lot of other alternatives and I will give you some in the maybe board. To finish out the sweepers, I'm going to include 1 Austere Command. It could destroy artifacts, enchantments or creatures, and you can choose a little bit in how you want to use the card. So I really like the flexibility of the card and I'm happy to pay an extra mana for it. And then there's also Planar Outburst. It will destroy all non-land creatures. It also has Awaken, and when you cast it for the Awaken cost, you could put 4 +1/+1 counters on target land you control, and it becomes a 0/0 elemental creature. So this is also interesting because of the proliferate theme, because if you use it for your Awaken cost, you can create a strong creature, but also a creature that can get bigger due to the proliferate theme. As I told you, I also play some enchantments. I play 1 Inexorable Tide, 1 Circle of Protection artifacts from back in the day. So the first card, the blue one, it helps me proliferate a lot more, and when this card is out, you will get a lot of counters on your permanents really fast, and this is great for both Armageddon's Clock and the Midnight Clock. Now, if you have an Armageddon's Clock out, you want to have the Circle of Protection artifacts or the Wanderer. So I included one of each, and you will think, well, that's not a lot to get the combo, because you will draw a lot of cards. You will be able to find the right cards to protect you from the Armageddon's Clock when it's needed. So don't worry about it. One is enough. I was already talking about Planeswalkers, so we talked about the Wanderer, but we'll have more than one Planeswalker in our deck. Let's have a look at the Planeswalkers we're playing. The Wanderer is a legendary Planeswalker that costs us 4 mana, and it will prevent us from the damage that the clock deals. It's also very good against a burn deck, because your burn opponent will have to destroy the Wanderer first before it could play burn spells on your creatures or on yourself. So a pretty interesting card that also has a -2 ability that could exile target creature with power 4 or greater. Now you might ask, well, aren't those Planeswalkers vulnerable? Yes, they maybe are vulnerable, but don't forget that the Proliferate team also puts extra counters on your Planeswalkers, so they will be more durable. So let's have a look at the next one. Dovin Baan costs 4 mana and has only 3 loyalty, but you can +1 it and use it to protect yourself against 1 threat, giving it -3, -1, and you can nullify the effect of its activated abilities. You can -1 it, so you can gain 2 life and you can draw a card, which is a very strong ability, and because of the Proliferate team will put a lot of extra counters on the Dovin Baan, so you can use the -1 ability a lot of times. And the -7 ability is a little bit Winter Orb, because your opponents can't untap more than 2 permanents during their untap steps. So that means that it will be very difficult for them when an ultimated Dovin Baan is out to remove counters from the Armageddon's Clock. Then I also play 1 Narset Parter of Veils, 3 mana for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker, and each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. So this card actually is very powerful and very difficult to deal with for other control decks. And it could also help you search for the right cards with its -2 ability. Now we're also going to play a lot of artifacts in the deck, and this Planeswalker is great with artifacts. Tezzeret Artifact Master is a 5 loyalty Planeswalker for 5 mana. For a +1 you can create a colorless Topter artifact creature with flying, which is mostly a defensive creature and really sometimes an offensive creature with the next card that I'm going to talk about. But I really like the 0 ability. You draw a card, but if you control 3 or more artifacts, you draw 2 cards. And this is usually the case when we have a Tezzeret out. So I was talking about the next card when I was talking about the Topters of Tezzeret, but also I have some small flyers in my deck. Well, they work very good with Sword of Truth and Justice. Our equipped creature gets +2/+2, protection from white and blue, but also when it deals combat damage, we put an extra counter on a creature we control, and then we proliferate, which will give all our permanents a lot more counters. So the sword also works really well with our proliferate team in our deck. And the last card I'm going to talk about is really an annoyance for your opponent when you have a good board state and a lot of proliferate effects and a lot of mana out there. It's called Magistratus Scepter. So this card costs 3 mana, and when you tap it and pay 4 mana, you can put a charge counter on it, and you can tap it and remove 3 counters to get an extra turn after this one. Now with all the proliferate effects, the idea is to get 4 counters on it, which will go pretty easy in the deck, and every turn you just remove 3 counters of it, put some counters back onto it, get an extra turn, do it again, get an extra turn, do it again, so your opponent will be left on the other side of the table wondering when the game is going to end and when you'll finally kill him. And to be honest, this could take a while. Now you might wonder, how do we put a lot of counters on it? Well, here are all the cards in the deck that work great with the Scepter. You'll see I have a lot of proliferate effects, and of course there are also the little flyers that proliferate. So the Magistrate Scepter is a great finisher in the deck. This was it, this was the deck tech. Now let's head into the power rankings. I gave this deck a power of 7. This is mostly for all the combo potential in the deck. It's not really a very aggressive deck. It is a bit complex. You'll have to learn how the proliferate mechanic works, when to do it correctly, and when to play the correct spells in an order that you could get the most value out of the proliferate mechanic. So it will take some time to learn, but it's really worth it. In terms of consistency, I also give it a 7. Offense, I gave it a 4. I don't play a lot of aggressive creatures and the deck is a control deck. I only attack with some small creatures and try to grind out the game with the Armageddon's Clock or the Scepter to get infinite turns, so that's why offense of 4. And defense, I gave the deck an 8. I have a lot of sweepers, a lot of blockers. I try to grind out the game, so a typical control deck is a defensive deck. And for a fun factor, this is personal, but for me it's an 8. Really, the only reason because it's an 8 is that if I manage to play the Armageddon's Clock and I can kill my opponent with it, I will be one happy person. These were the power rankings. Now let's head into the metagame review and see how the deck does against other decks. Versus aggro, it's not that great of a matchup because when your opponent is playing haste creatures, your sweepers have less effect, so against aggro I gave it a 6. If you have a little bit more time to set up, the deck is quite good. So against mid-range deck I gave it a 7, and against control I gave it an 8, mostly because we have a lot of mana and we play also Planeswalkers and Narset Barter of Veils. Against a combo deck I gave it a 7, maybe a 6 also, I don't really know. It doesn't have a lot of disruption. So you can only destroy a combo with your sweepers or with Austere Command. So against combo, a 7 or maybe a 6. Now to end the deck, I'm going to talk about a bit more of a budget version about this deck in the Maybe board. So you'll be able to build it for around $20 US, $25 US or 20 euros. Let's have a look. If you don't want to invest in a Sphinx's Revelation, this is fine. Just buy a clear water goblet. This is a great source of life gain, which works incredibly well with the Proliferate team. Most expensive sweepers in the deck are Supreme Verdict and Austere Command, but you can also swap them and add 2 more Planar Outbursts. This card is really cheap to buy. You can find it for maybe $0.50 or €0.50 in any bulk binder, so a great alternative for the deck. Sword of Truth and Justice is also a few bucks, but you can easily swap it out with a Flux Channeler. This is a great blocker that also does a lot of work in the Proliferate team. And if Tezzeret, the Artifice Master, is too expensive for you, just add in another common contentious plan. So this was it. This was our deck tech of the control clock. I hope you enjoyed the deck tech, and I will be soon adding some new deck techs. So keep on following the channel. Subscribe if you haven't done so. And as always, keep it casual. I see you next time. Bye.